and welcome to this edition of Tales from the Bargain Bin. I'm Bill Tucker, as always, and with me for today's episode is a luminary of the retro video game scene, or community, as it's probably better to be described. With me is streamer and video producer and all-around good guy, Mr. Ducksindisguise. What's going on, man?
Thanks for that wonderful intro. Not much. It's a good day to be here. Thanks for having me on the show again. I had a blast last time. Yeah. Thanks for having me. This is it's great to be back. Thanks.
Yeah, man. This is when I can get someone like Dux on. It's like getting like a amazing like starting pitcher on my team or something. It's like, oh man, here we go. We got Dux on. We're gonna have a good time. So.
Oh, that's awesome. Great.
Yeah, man. Thanks for taking the time. If this is your first time checking out Tales from the Bargain Bin, this is a show where we discuss the games we received from well-meaning family members that probably didn't quite get us or didn't understand what a good game is, or maybe went to Walmart and said, you know what, why am I going to pay $60 for this game when this game is $15? But sometimes little gems are found in those experiences. Sometimes they're pretty cool and unique and different. Tonight we are talking about a game that is none of those things, although maybe unique. South Park, the video game for the PlayStation 1, released in 1999 on said PS1. So Dux, this is your pick. Why did you pick this? Where did you receive this? When? What's the story behind it?
So this was definitely a game that surprised me back then. A well-meaning family member, I'm going to leave names out of it here, but a well-meaning family member thought, you know what, he likes South Park, he likes video games, this is a surefire win. And sure enough, when I opened it up, I was like, oh hey, South Park, very cool, I've been wanting to check this out. So take it home, fire it up. I'm like, all right, so right off the bat, it's nearly impossible to control. That's the first thing you're going to notice is simply moving and looking around is nearly impossible. And quite frankly, I think that's inexcusable. GoldenEye came out like 2 years before this.
Right.
And granted, different console, but I mean... It was just so off. So anyways, I was frustrated right off the bat. But then as you get more and more into the game, you realize it has very little to do with South Park other than the characters and a handful of voice lines. Definitely a bit sad, a bit disappointing. Every well intention was there, or good intention was there, but the game just disappointed me in so many ways.
I played it for the PSX version last night for the first time, and that was literally my exact response. It was just sadness and disappointment. Like, okay, we'll talk about South Park as an entity probably a little bit later, because I think that's actually interesting. Because South Park is still a thing,
right? Which
is amazing to me. That it's still a show that's on right now with new episodes every year, right?
Yeah.
But I played this on the N64.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you had brought it to my attention, I'm like, South Park on the PlayStation, I started playing it and like, oh, this is that terrible N64 game my brother and I rented a few times. Oh, so the PSX version is a port of the N64 version that came out a year before.
Mm-hmm.
Both games are identical games, basically. I think that the N64 has a few more flourishes. It's a little brighter graphically. But still the horrendous draw distance. I mean, it literally looks like you're walking in fog at all times. The control, like you said, is really what sinks it. Mm-hmm. For those who've never played it, you walk around and use D-pad obviously to navigate around, but your back triggers are the strafe. So in order to like swing around, you got to hold like the right trigger and right to awkwardly swing around. And all you're doing for the first, because I played about 45 minutes of this last night. I gave it a good go. All I remember is being attacked by turkeys and that horrendous gobbling sound.
Yep. Yeah. So I don't know what happens beyond the first level. I really Because here's the thing, I am a South Park fan. I think again we can get into this later, but I think it's a brilliant show where really solid writing and smart jokes are just kind of hidden behind toilet humor. But anyways, so big fan of the show. I thought this was going to be great, and it between the controls and the turkeys and just again it felt very much like some other game was being developed, and they're like, let's just put South Park characters in there, whatever.
It definitely has almost like an asset flip type of a vibe to it.
Yeah.
Now, did it have the original? Because there are moments in there, little tiny, 20-second cutscenes where you have the characters interacting with Chef usually, and Chef kind of expositing what's going on. The threadbare story of aliens coming down and attack, or a comet. That's right, a comet crashes into the mountains behind South Park, and crazy things are happening. Was that the original cast? I don't know.
I don't know if they recorded new voice lines, but if I remember correctly, they're at least they sound very similar.
Yeah.
I do remember Matt and Trey kind of distancing themselves from this game and really everything prior to Stick of Truth, saying that they didn't have much involvement in it and things like that.
Right.
So maybe they provided some voice lines on this, but
Maybe.
I highly doubt they were involved in the creative aspect, developing the and I'm going to use this term loosely, plot of the game.
Because there's not much of anything. Well, the main, of course, your main weapon in the game are snowballs, of which you have an unlimited amount. Yep. You can pee on the snowball.
Yep.
I don't know if it does anything, makes it stronger. I don't know.
Yeah, it does more damage. I hate that I know this, but yeah, it does more damage.
Because all I fought were turkeys, and they all take one hit, so it wasn't like I felt like I was achieving anything. I mean, they call them the tanks, which are like the larger version of the enemies that spawn smaller versions. But the one thing I will say is pretty neat about the game is the weapon variety is pretty cool. I think it's actually very entertaining, the weapons.
Yeah.
As you move forward, you get like a crank machine gun that shoots plungers that I think you can pick up and reuse. Get dodgeballs that bounce around. You basically literally hold a chicken and shoot eggs. A cow bazooka. So I think those are actually fun. The enemies and not the enemies. The enemies are terrible. They're just the same thing. But the weapons are actually pretty fun.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. There seems like there's little bits of a good idea there, and maybe it was one of those situations where we got to have this thing out by holiday or something like that, or they were worried that they were going to miss out on the South Park craze.
Yeah.
So it's just like get the game out, but I mean, even later on, South Park has had kind of a rough run in its early days of video games. There wasn't really, I mean, you had a trivia game, you had kind of this kart racer, which was average at best.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, this one in particular always stands out to me as just the ultimate disappointment, because I kind of love FPS games, especially retro ones. The like 2D pixel kind of stuff like Doom and Duke Nukem and all that good stuff.
Sure.
All the way up to early 3D, and even modern ones some of them are pretty good. So this was kind of like, at the time this was perfect. FPS, South Park, awesome. But once you get in and you realize that it's more like the difficulty comes from moving around and trying to aim than anything that's in the game as a legitimate challenge. At least as much as I played. Like I said, I didn't get that far before I was like, nope, this is not going to happen.
I think my brother and I, because there is a multiplayer piece to it, of course there is. There's just, as was the time. And I think we played like the multiplayer, because again, this was on the N64. And again, it was one of those where I think we rented it once or twice, because my brother was, and he might still be, I have to ask him about it, is a huge South Park fan. And I think everybody in that era was, and if we kind of like think back to when this game was released, this was released right at the beginning of the South Park craze, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
Do you remember the first time you encountered South Park as just an entity?
Oh, definitely. And it is, to anybody born like after the 90s, this isn't going to make any sense at all. But so my first exposure to South Park was on like a VHS tape, right? One of those blank VHS tapes that somebody recorded like the first 5 episodes on. And it was one of my older brother's friends, so my older brother gets it, and he brings it to me and my older brother. You know, there's like three of us, and he's like, "You guys have to watch this." And I was around that age where this was just right in the pocket as far as humor goes. I thought it was hilarious that there was a cartoon that was swearing like this, and all the crazy stuff happening and everything with the aliens. I just thought it was like right away. It instantly hooked me. And it showed up on that blank VHS tape. Like that's kind of like urban legend like in itself. Like, like this bootleg thing shows up, with just like a bootleg label on it that says South Park. All the commercials and everything from Comedy Central were on it and everything. And I just instantly I was like, this is great.
Yeah, it shows up with a different label on it, so your parents don't know what it is. Like you put in like a random like documentary, like something really boring that no one want to pop in, but you know what it is, and then it's South Park.
Right, it's like National Geographic's Magical World of Amphibians or something like that. And they're like, yeah, it's fine.
Oh man, not even my mom's gonna check the National World of Amphibians. That's
right, yeah.
Oh man, so I remember I know we watched it, and I'm pretty sure we had cable and Comedy Central. And my brother has always been a huge fan of animation. He loves animation, always has, again to this day. And I like it fine, but I don't connect to it as much as he does. And that South Park was kind of his thing, and he was younger. I was what is this now? I guess South Park landed like in 97, I want to say. Like 96, 97 is when it first like really dropped. I was 17. I was a senior in high school. And my brother's 5 years younger. So he's like middle school. That's like right in the pocket for...
Right.
I mean, 17 is too, but come on. Middle school kid, bunch of kids kind of his age, swearing and going on adventures, Mr. Hanky and all that.
Yeah, I was like in my early teens, so it was like, it was perfect timing for that kind of thing. Well, and I think just culturally too, it kind of blended in with the, there was a lot of attitude, right? Everywhere you looked, music, entertainment, everything was very much, there was a lot of profanity and, and just like, I don't know, it seemed like our generation of that time was really just kind of acting out. And I think South Park is a product of that.
I would agree with that. I absolutely do agree with that. I think it's interesting too. Like, the late 90s, 99 was the era of, celebrity deathmatch, like that was just on TV, on MTV, I think, actually.
Yeah.
That was just on cable. So you're right. It was a lot of edge. It was, new metal was coming into fashion, in that early 2000s. So you're right. There was a lot of angst after an era where there really wasn't a ton. Like, 96, 97 was... Summer of Ska and Spice Girls and like everything's great. Like everything's good, supposedly. Wasn't really, but everything supposedly was good.
Right, yeah. Yeah, that was kind of the image being put out there. But then, South Park and nu metal and Eminem and WWF and all this stuff just, it was like, whoa.
Yeah, it really got to that kind of like aggressive thing. The one thing I always appreciated about South Park was the animation, the cardboard cutout style. I always found that really clever and fun and good. But as the series went on, it went less into the potty humor and really leaned into satire. And I really do think, oh my God, is it Trey Stone and Matt Parker? Is that right?
Matt Parker and Trey Stone. Yep. Those are the guys.
Okay, cool. I thought I messed them up, but they are really good satirists. If that's the right term for someone who creates satire. I might be wrong on that. And and that was always interested me about the progression of South Park. How it, like you said at the open, it's smart, but it's hidden behind this veneer of political incorrectness and potty humor and all that sort of thing. Are you still watching South Park today? Like, is that something you pop on once in a while?
The last thing I watched was the pandemic special. And that was pretty good. I mean, they're kind of dragging some of these storylines a bit longer than they should, which after 25 seasons or whatever they're on.
Yeah, 25, something like that, yeah.
Yeah, you're going to have some of that. And I think for a show that's been on that long, they have been amazingly consistent. I've watched just about every season, and there is definitely a very visible progression from the first season to the second, because, well, even from the first to the second episode, you notice it because the first one, you mentioned the cardboard cutout style. Those two guys actually did all that stop motion with little cardboard cutouts for the eyes and hands and everything.
It's amazing.
Yeah, right. To have that much dedication to put a full episode through that. So that was kind of their pilot. They pitched it over to Comedy Central, and they got picked up. So after that, they got a little bit of a budget and they started working with computers. So even between those first two episodes, you can see a pretty big jump. Like, there's not as many shadows on the characters and stuff from the overhead light on the cardboard.
Interesting.
But anyways, yeah, the writing is the thing that surprised me most as the show kept going, because it started getting really, really smart. They did an entire episode. It was called Raising the Bar. And I found it fascinating because it was kind of self-aware and self-referential. We just kind of talked about South Park came in that era where, society, just the popular media was just like, we had enough, now we're angry and whatever. But throughout this episode, they kind of explored that, when did media start becoming more and more about fast production and reality TV and, basically what I would call popcorn entertainment, stuff that doesn't have a lot of substance, but people just consume it in mass.
Sure.
Where did that really start? And then the boys kind of look at each other and, obviously within the context of the episode, they're like, did we have a hand in lowering the bar? I mean, they're obviously talking about the situation that they're in, but if you look back at it from the perspective of South Park, it's like, wow, these guys are really asking, out in front of their entire audience, like, hey, did we have something to do with all this?
That's interesting. I love when a work comments on itself. That's cool.
Yeah. And they just have a lot of really smart moments like that. And unfortunately, it's missed out because, the general perception of South Park is it's just crude humor. They like to rip on celebrities and stuff like that. But if you actually pay attention to the show, it's really intelligent.
And it's interesting, too, because someone must be watching it, because I haven't seen a South Park episode in, I don't know, 15 years. I can't remember the last time I've seen a South Park episode. But someone must be watching it, because I was doing a little bit of research last night. They just got picked up again to run through 2027.
Yeah.
So they got another extension. So they will be going until 2027. And good for them. I mean, it sounds like people really enjoy it, and there's an audience for it, evidently. If The Simpsons can do it, why can't South Park? We all know how modern Simpsons episodes are.
Yeah, that is a show I haven't watched in a while.
My brother still watches them.
Yeah?
And I ask him, I'm like, are they good? He goes, no, they're not. He's like, once in a while you'll get a decent one, but no. So I asked, so why do you still watch it? He's like, I've seen all of them. I gotta see it through.
Yeah,
see it through.
For some, it's just tradition, right? You fall in love with the show, and it's like, I just catch up with the show, even if it's good or not. It's kind of interesting. I'm starting to see that more in, what would you call it, modern content creation type media, like over on YouTube and stuff like that. Some of these channels that started, when YouTube was very young, that are still doing it, they're starting to settle into this groove where the audience is like, yeah, we know this isn't as good as it used to be, but we're here because we love the creator, or we love the character, or the ideas, or whatever it is, and they just keep coming back for that. So I think there's a certain appeal to, if you really knock it out of the park with a solid IP and a solid property, and do that right for a few years, you're going to have a dedicated audience that might see it through some tough times. The Simpsons tough times has been years, in my opinion, but yeah, fan base is still there.
If it's there, they're there, right? And so the question for South Park the game, I think I know the answer to this, but what would be the main thing you would improve to make that game better than what it ended up being?
Oh, I could go on a bit of a tangent here. So
go for it. The show's all about tangents. This is the tangent show.
So we're going to start with the controls, obviously.
Yeah.
By this point, I believe the DualShock was out. So why not have DualShock support? Or at least, they they had the N64 version out already. If you were going to wait a little longer to produce a PlayStation version, wait until the DualShock version is out there, so you at least have that, right? You can have analog control. But then, yeah, give it some of the modern comforts, left stick for move, right stick for camera. I would move strafing. Well, maybe. I mean,
hard.
yeah, it's maybe a quick turnaround button. Anyway, so controls, I'm not going to map them all out right now, but obviously controls are a big one.
That's like the number one for me, but yeah.
Yeah. Second thing is I would have just added more things from the show, I guess, to have as set pieces. Even if you were working with just the first few episodes worth of information, I mean, if you had 4 episodes, that's still a lot of material. To make an entire game out of. If you split each episode in half, you got 8 levels. Boom, good to go. So yeah, I would definitely change that. I would have done whatever it took to get Matt and Trey involved in the script.
Yeah.
A big part of South Park's strength is its writing. And without that, it just kind of falls apart. Even if you slap a good game on it, I mean, if it's just their voices, and you can tell.
Oh, sure.
Where the writing's coming from, especially on a property like this, where the same few people have been doing it the whole time. Yeah, I mean, those are just a few of the things that I would have done.
Now, allow me to panic you, because not only was South Park the video game released first on the N64, a year later ported over to Windows and PlayStation, there was a Game Boy Color edition coming.
Oh no.
It was never finished, because the creators of South Park said this is not really they associated Game Boy with kids. And they're like, this shouldn't be on a system for kids. Yeah. So they canceled it. Can you imagine? Can you fathom what this would have been on a Game Boy Color?
I cannot. I mean, I imagine they would have had to change it to like an isometric thing. Right? That was the typical thing with Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance games. When it was like a 3D game port, they typically just threw an isometric angle on it and said, it's good enough. Sometimes that worked, like the Tony Hawk game. I think it was Tony Hawk 2 on Game Boy Advance. Not bad. Could have been a lot worse. But in this case, that's probably what we were looking at there. And I mean, good call not putting it on the Game Boy Color. I guess, they did know their audience, and at that time they were going through all kinds of controversies and stuff too, right? With just having this on TV, even though it was later at night.
Right.
I imagine they didn't also want all of the millions of Nintendo parents out there.
No, imagine that.
Yeah.
It's actually amazing it made it to the N64. That was the launch platform. The N60, Nintendo, like you said, family friendly, not known for. Although, the Nintendo 64 has quite a few games that are pretty violent and brutal. Turok, let's just say. Boy, oh boy.
Yeah,
but
Turok is pretty bad.
Yeah, I mean, Turok 2. So it's a little surprising, though, that a game that would garner that kind of controversy. Because, the name South Park in those days was tied to controversy. And credit to the creators, they leaned into it. They just said, all right, we're just going to go bigger and bigger and bigger and see where the rubber band breaks, and it never did, which is very interesting. And like you said, credit to their writing, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that they're kind of shielded from, they are a few of the very, very few creators who can pretty much say anything they want to say within reason. And people are just going to be like, that's what they do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
They've really reached a point where, like, that's a really good point. They've reached a point where most creators would love to be. They're famous enough where they'll always have an audience and have a passionate, devoted audience that they can communicate with their work. And they're also given the leeway. They're not famous enough anymore to really, they fly under the radar, so to speak. So they have this really great pocket of South Park that people really love still. They're still very successful. Obviously, Matt and Trey are doing other things. Did you ever see, again, this, who knows, but did you ever see Book of Mormon?
I haven't seen it yet. I wonder if there's maybe like some sort of like recording of the live show or something like that.
Yeah.
But I have not seen it. It's one of the few things from them I haven't seen. They've done a lot of really cool stuff outside of South Park. If you're into that, again, if you get South Park, you'll get some of their other movies.
Sure,
if not,
sure.
You're not going to become a fan over one of those. But yeah, I just think that's again another credit to their writing, that they can just jump to a completely new medium like a musical and be like, all right, we're going to do a musical, and it turns out to be a smash hit. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah. Smash hit. I used to live in New York, and I remember when it first, because it first was released in 2011, and I was in the city right when that first hit on Broadway, and
Wow.
I used to go past the theater all the time on the way to my wife's apartment, because she lived on the west side, I lived on the east side, and I would usually just kind of cut through the Broadway area to get there, and I'd always pass by there, and every time I passed by that theater, no matter what time of day it was, there'd be people sitting at the side of the theater waiting for day of tickets or cancel tickets, just waiting to see if they can get into that play. It was Hamilton crazy. Like, it was nuts. You could not, and it's probably still hard to get a ticket to. It's still running on Broadway. 10, 11 years later. I think it's like the 14th longest consecutive running Broadway play. So, they must have done something right. I've never seen it, and it's one of those I always like, I would love to check that out. But yeah, not in New York, not for $150 a ticket. I don't know.
Yeah. No, and having to wait outside and everything like that.
No. It was always amazed me. And again, I know they were waiting for Book of Mormon. So, all right, man. Well, so actually, real quick question, actually, as we kind of close out the conversation a bit.
Yeah.
You mentioned that they've done other things. If let's say you're talking to me, who you are talking to me.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen the South Park thing in 15 years probably.
Okay.
What thing of theirs would you recommend to me to kind of get me back on that train?
So if you want to get back into South Park, but you don't want to watch South Park, I would recommend the movie Basketball. It is the perfect, just off the wall kind of comedy that it's a callback to the classic comedies of the 90s, I think, because it's got little bits of influence, I think, from like Mel Brooks films and things like that, where there's a bit of like way over the top humor. But again, you get that smart writing from these guys where it's a sports hero story, guys with a dream, they want to make something. And it's very well filmed and things like that. But of course, then you got to deal with all of the really crude jokes and the sometimes where you're just like, oh, what did I just see?
That's funny.
Yeah. So yeah, I'd recommend that
Baseball.
like, yeah, I'm big on comedy movies like that, the ones that are just slapstick kind of stupid at times, but also make you laugh. Like Tommy Boy is a favorite of mine.
Yeah, so that's a classic. Yes.
Yeah, Happy Gilmore. Yeah, all those kind of 90s classic comedies. So when I saw Basketball, I was like, this feels like one of those movies, just South Parkified.
Cool. The only thing I know about Basketball, I've never seen it, is Real Big Fish does a cover of Take On Me. I'm pretty sure it's from the Basketball soundtrack.
Yep, they're actually in the movie. Yeah.
That's right. They are actually in the movie, because I remember when the video hit, it was all basketball references and scenes, I guess, from the film. So, yes, that is my touch point, my cultural touch point for basketball.
There we go. Yeah.
Right on, man. So to close out, I ask just one question, and I think I know the answer to this, but I'll put it to you anyway.
Sure.
Does South Park, the video game for the PlayStation 1, are you putting it back in the bin, or are you taking it home?
This answer might surprise you. You know what? I'm going to take it home. I'm going to take it home.
Yeah.
Well, now hold on.
Okay,
I'm going to take it home because, as you know, I have an affinity for games that are not so good. I also didn't put Home Improvement back. I also didn't put Bubsy 3D back. There are certain games that have a badness to them that is enjoyable. Like, this is one of those games that I don't think I would play very often, but it's one of those things when you have guests over or you're talking to somebody about video games, or like me, you're a content creator and you want to look at something interesting that not necessarily everybody knows a lot about, or is just going to get good vibes from, every now and again, it's fun to just laugh at something. This is one of those games, in my opinion, Hall of Fame, bad surprise type games. Because there's bad games where it's just like, yeah, this thing is not great and I'm never going to play it or talk about it. But then there's games like South Park, and here we are doing an entire episode.
That's fair. That's, you know what? That's an extremely fair point.
About South Park.
I know, listen, I think sometimes it's better to be bad than boring. At least if you're bad, you can examine why. But if you're boring, there's just nothing. If there's just lifelessness.
Yeah, that goes right back in the bin.
It goes right back in the bin. Unfortunately for me, I have to put this back in the bin.
I don't blame you.
You can't. Your impassioned reasoning, I respect greatly, but man, this is a dog, and I have the emulator. I had to download a BIOS for it, like a whole thing, and I will leave the emulator on my system. It's not polluting anything. It's not taking up a ton of space. Yeah. But I highly doubt I'll fire this up again. Maybe my brother, when he's over next time he finds himself in Texas.
There you go.
I'll be like, hey, Bobby, remember this game? Yeah. Fire it up, and he will just, I wonder, I'll just sit back and await the response. Or maybe I'll stream it. Maybe one of these Tuesday nights, I'll stream South Park.
Boy.
Oh, man. Boy, oh, boy. I don't know if I could. Too many repetitive Cartman comments.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, thanks so much for being on the show, Dux. This was a lot of fun. If you enjoyed the show, then I enjoy you. We can be friends over the internets, friends and family over the internet. If you enjoyed this, please check me out on Twitter at @gamerlooksat4040. On there is a Linktree link that takes you to my Patreon, to all the places you can download and subscribe to the show, to my Facebooks. Everything there is to find can be found right there, so check it out. Thanks again, Dux, for joining me on the show, and until next time, continue being awesome.